Well, I got my notes, check. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Pepsi, check. Thick skin, check. Let's go. Hey, welcome to Golden Blue Dude, everybody. If you're a college football fan, might as well hit the like and subscribe button because that's all we do over here. Go check out our Patreon page. We call our Patreons the shot callers because that's exactly what they do around here. And when the regular season gets here, our Patreons will get to decide which game we'll live stream, and you'll get to watch with Golden Blue Dude. And the score prediction contest will be coming back. Every week I pick out a game and my Patreons guess the score, and whoever comes closest to the score wins $20 every single week, and you can win as many times as you want. The higher the Patreon, the more guesses you get per week. Well, first of all, happy 4th of July to everybody out there. I hope you have a happy and safe 4th of July. And do your patriotic duty and either set off fireworks or watch fireworks. I will fall under the setting off fireworks category. Maybe I'll do a video about it. I don't know yet. We'll see how it goes. Conference realignment is still the talk of the town. And the goal of all this, from what I'm hearing, even CBS is saying this, is that the Big Ten and the SEC want to get to 24 teams apiece and then split off from the NCAA, create their own division, league, conference, whatever you want to call it, have their own rules, have their own governing body, and just be separate from the NCAA. Just in football, though. In basketball, that's a whole different story because the NCAA tournament is the NCAA tournament. So they'd still have some say in the basketball aspect. But football, they're like, no, we're making way too much money. Your rules don't make any sense. So we're going to get to our magical number, most people saying 24, and we're splitting off. Bye-bye NCAA. So the first conference that I want to look at in this scenario is the SEC. Now right now they're sitting at 16 teams. They just added Oklahoma and Texas a year ago. But now I'm hearing that they're going after Virginia, Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina. But that's just probably the next step. So those of you that aren't picked in this round, don't freak out. There will be another round after that because they're trying to get to 24. So who do they take after those four? Well, I think they also grab Miami. Miami's a huge brand. I know Florida, they're not going to like having two Florida teams in there with them, but it's part of the deal. It's part of the process of splitting off. You have to get to 24, and Miami's a massive brand in the state of Florida, so you have to pick up Miami. Sorry. Then there's Virginia Tech. I'm actually surprised they wouldn't take Virginia Tech in the first round as well. Virginia over Virginia Tech doesn't really make that much sense to me. The only thing that I can think of is maybe North Carolina was like, hey, we need some type of rivalry. Either give us an NC State, a Duke, or a Virginia. North Carolina and Virginia are bigger rivalries than what you realize. Another team the SEC could take would be Louisville. Louisville is actually a pretty big brand. They have a pretty big TV market. I think Louisville would fit perfectly in with the SEC. They already have Kentucky. Maybe Kentucky wouldn't like it all that much, but oh well. Get over it, Kentucky. Louisville makes sense. And then finally, West Virginia. West Virginia has been on the SEC's docket before. It came up the first go-around about a decade ago whenever it was between West Virginia and Missouri to go along with Texas A&M. In fact, ESPN was about to invite West Virginia when ESPN stepped in and said, hold on now. Now, we like West Virginia, but we want to expand our footprint a little farther west. So send it to Missouri if you want this money, and that's what the SEC did. They extended the invite to Missouri and not West Virginia. So West Virginia is on the SEC's radar. I just don't think they would get the first round pick. I think they would be a second round pick, but they would be a pick. So here's what the SEC would look like at 24 teams with those picks. You'd have the current members: Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, South Carolina, Florida, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, Texas, and Oklahoma. Then adding on the newbies: Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, and Louisville. That is a very good-looking conference. And before you give me any lip about West Virginia, because I know you're thinking about it, and I've already done videos on this, but right now, with Oklahoma and Texas gone from the Big 12, that's what I'm counting this as, West Virginia would have the #1 fan base and the #1 revenue-producing football program. That's right, #1. And not only would you bring in the biggest fan base from the Big 12, but you'd also be bringing more eyeballs from current fan bases, like the new ones, like your Miamis, your North Carolinas, your Virginia Techs, your Virginias, even Oklahoma and Texas. They like to play in West Virginia. So yeah, this would definitely help out the SEC, and West Virginia would fit in quite nicely. West Virginia is still labeled as a southeastern state. I know that really doesn't matter because you have a university from Missouri, a university from Oklahoma, and several universities from the state of Texas, and those are not southeastern states. Go look at a map, that's a fact. So with these 24 teams, I think they would go to the PODS system. What would the PODS look like? I think there would be 4 PODS with 6 teams apiece. When you think about it, that's only 1 team shy of their current division alignment. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Right now they have the SEC West and the SEC East, 7 teams in the West, 7 teams in the East. This is only 1 team less than that. So you almost have a mini division from what you have now. But you could still call them PODS because there's 4 of them. Your first pod, I would call this the Midwest. This is where you'd have Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and LSU. I think you preserve a lot of rivalries here. Of course, Texas and Texas A&M, Texas and Oklahoma, Texas and Missouri, Texas and Arkansas. And then Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Missouri, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Texas A&M, LSU. And don't forget about Arkansas and LSU. That's a pretty good rivalry right there as well. So there's your Midwest pod. On to the Central Pod. Yeah, that's the best name I could think of this. If you have a better name for the Central Pod, let me know in the comments. I'm open to any ideas. So here are the Central Pod members. Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. You're preserving a lot of rivalries in this scenario. Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, a bigger rivalry than you realize. Of course, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Tennessee and Auburn, that's a decent rivalry, not all that historic, but it's decent. And then, of course, Tennessee and Vanderbilt in the state of Tennessee, preserving that rivalry as well. So there's your Central Pod, and like I said earlier, if you have a better name, let me know in the comments. I'm open to anything. Next up is what I call the Deep South Pod. You'd have Florida, Florida State, Miami, South Carolina, Clemson, and Georgia. This is probably my favorite pod. I love this pod. Look at all the rivalries here. You have Florida, Florida State, Florida, Miami, Florida State, Miami. You have South Carolina, Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Clemson, Miami, Clemson, Florida State. This is a great pod. If this happens, this would probably be my all-time favorite pod. And I call it the Deep South Pod. And I actually like that name. Of course, you can give your suggestions, but I'm probably not going to budge off the Deep South Pod. I like the name. I like the matchups. I like the rivalries that are preserved in this. I like this a lot. But finally, the last pod. And I call this pod the Appalachian Pod. Yeah, I like that name. And it makes sense. The Appalachian Pod. You'd have Kentucky. You'd have Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. This is an amazing pod as well. Preserving a lot of rivalries. Kentucky and Louisville. Kentucky and West Virginia could be a budding rivalry. You'd have North Carolina, Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Virginia, West Virginia, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, West Virginia, Louisville, West Virginia, North Carolina. That could be a decent rivalry. So there's a lot of great rivalries preserved there and a lot of potential budding rivalries that could pop out of this pod for the SEC. So that's probably my second favorite pod out of the SEC. So you'd have the Midwest pod with Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, LSU. You'd have the Central pod with Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. You'd have the Deep South pod with Florida, Florida State, Miami, South Carolina, Clemson, and Georgia. And then, of course, the Appalachian pod, Kentucky, Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. I like it, but maybe you don't. Maybe you would switch some things around. But to me, this is genius. This would be perfect. I like all the names except for the Central pod. There has got to be a better name. So I'm counting on you, the viewer and the subscriber, to give me a better name than the Central Pod, because that's a little too generic for me. So y'all let me know in the comments section what a better name for that Central Pod would be. Anyways, y'all let me know what you think about this situation, the SEC going to 24 teams, the teams that I have picked, and the name of the pods and the teams in the pods. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next show.